This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 457, entitled "When to Tell Your Female E-Dates That You're a Masculist." Description. This flyer talks about when it is advisable for a masculist to tell his female E-dates that he is. Most women have heard nothing about masculism, so tend to react negatively the first time they hear the term, thinking that it is a movement that is anti-women. If women remain hypocritical in this way, that is pro-feminist but anti-masculist, then masculists will punish them badly by dumping them, until women become biconscious and empathize readily with men for the ways that fluffy manslavers and fluffy feminist hypocrites profoundly gender oppress men. And the flyer itself. When to tell your female E-dates that you're a masculist, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This is the third time I've been through the e-dating mill in the past few years. Each time I have to debate with myself just when and how will I tell my female e-dates that I'm a masculist. During the first time, the first round, I learned quickly that nearly all women are monoconscious and have been powerfully brainwashed that gender oppression is a one-way street, since they have been exposed for 6 decades only to feminism and know nothing about masculism, seeing men's traditional role of working for women, in brackets, or in masculist speak, quote, being a manslave to a woman, end quote, in bracket, as the norm, not to be questioned as part of the furniture. Several times during that first round, I learned that women instinctively react negatively, even fearfully, when I told them that I was a masculist. So I adapted, since I did not want to have women who looked initially as potentially interesting hack off immediately, thinking that this guy, that is me, is a woman hater, which is what they usually think when hearing the word masculist for the first time. Many times I've seen women show a flash of fear in their eyes for a fraction of a second when I tell them I'm a masculist. I actually looked for it for a while, expecting it, then asked these women why they had a flash of fear when I told them, but their answers were usually crappy, so I stopped asking them. Now that I'm in my third round of e-dating, I'm confronted with the same question. So after a bit of experience dealing with this problem during the first 2 rounds, my general strategy is as follows. Basically, I ease into it rather than being upfront as I was initially in my first round. My reasoning then was that if I put time and mental energy into a woman only to have her hack off from me the moment she hears from me that I'm a masculist, then that would be an awful waste of time and effort. So my current approach is to say things gradually, such as, I'm interested in men's lib. For example, what's happening to men in the divorce courts when their ex-wives are not career competent. Or, women have the MARA, that's maternity rejection right, aka abortion right, but men don't have the PARA. It's difficult for women to argue against such statements, since they are so obviously true. Women would appear callous towards men to argue against such statements. But gradually, after weeks or months of dating, that is, giving the woman, the potential girlfriend, plenty of time to get to know me, so she can see the whole of me, my full personality, only then do I gradually start telling her of my masculine anger, later hatred, of what fluffies and fluffy feminists are doing to men in the divorce courts. No para, Fluffy's decades-lasting manslavery, the strong masculist moral push onto women, especially young women, to FIP up, that's become FIPs, financially independent persons, by getting a career competent education, etc. Generalising now, for cases where the man is the masculist and the woman knows nothing about masculism, and they are starting to date, then if the woman is fair and open-minded, she will see the logic and sense in what the masculist is saying. That is, she's probably well on the way to becoming a female masculist, in the same kind of way that today there are millions of male feminists who empathise with women about the way some men oppress women. For example, with men's rape and sexual harassment of women, men's domestic violence against women, etc. She's just being humane and empathetic to masculist arguments. But masculism is still not yet widely known enough in society for a man to be able to say relaxedly up front to a woman that he is a masculist, since 99.9+% of women probably haven't even heard of the term before, although they can guess what it means, given the word's similarity with the word feminist, and guess that it's an anti-women's movement, given that most women see feminism as an anti-men's movement, which may be a misconception to most feminists, but that's the common conception of feminism amongst most women, I would say, knowing that 2/3 of young American women say they believe in equal rights for women, but that they are not feminists, because if they stated publicly that they were, they fear that that would jeopardize their chances of getting a boyfriend. In my second round of e-dating, I met and had a year-long relationship with a woman whom I thought was actually quite good. The fact that the relationship lasted a year says something, but on the other hand, the fact that it lasted only a year also says something. When we broke up and I asked her for a closure email, the first thing she mentioned was my masculism, which rankled with me. I always found her negative attitude towards masculism, that is masculist anger, masculist hatred against manslavery and manslavers, that is fluffies and fluffy feminists, as hypocritical, because she was an avid feminist when she was a young woman, having read the major feminist books written by Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan, Germaine Greer, Shulamith Firestone, etc. Yet she said she really did not like masculist anger and hatred. This was hypocrisy to me, because she was both feminist and anti-masculist, accepting the right of feminists to be angry at men for the way that men oppress women, but rejected vice versa. But the sex was good, very good, regular, erotic, great. You may have heard an expression in this regard that, quote, a man can tolerate a lot in a woman if the sex is good, end quote. I think there's a lot of truth in that quip, but in her closure email, her anti-masculist sentiment was top of the list, the first thing she mentioned, so that pissed me off, really pissed me off. One of my earlier masculist flyers, number 302, entitled, quote, millions of Western women will go through a lot of pain as they fail to adapt to men's growing masculist anger at women, so are then rejected by men. End quote. The MGTOWs, that's men going their own way, an important branch of the men's lib movement, brackets, who are largely reacting to the toxicity of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system that financially crucifies and destroys the lives about to sneeze, of a quarter of fathers, close brackets, refuse to marry, reject paternity, given that a father runs a 1 in 4 chance of losing his kids in these hated, fluffy, feminist-controlled divorce courts, close brackets, and spend their money on themselves. The main strength of the MGTOWs is their analysis of women's psychology and women's evolutionary psychological history. Masculists, on the other hand, are more political, angry, and combative towards women for the ways that women oppress men, especially with women's manslavery that lasts for decades, which is a far greater gender crime committed by women against men than rape is committed by men against women. because it lasts decades. Masculists are fighters and abolitionists, out to free men from decades of manslavery at the hands of fluffy parasites, whom masculists punish severely by forcing them to rot on the shelf, by being totally ignored by masculists, not even pumped and dumped. MGTOWs, on the other hand, are apolitical and passive, preferring to just quietly walk away from women, living the MGTOW lifestyle. Masculists, on the other hand, use MGTOW tactics to punish women, to punish manslavers for being manslavers by MGTOWing them, that is, forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at by masculists for being manslaving parasites. As a masculist, I have learned a lot about female psychology, and especially about the evolutionary psychology of women from the MGTOWs. When I asked the question to myself, quote, why did my previous girlfriend not feel real sympathy towards masculist arguments? Question mark. Why did she not have an intuitive and immediate emotional empathy towards masculist arguments, admitting readily the reality of the awful gender oppression that millions of women are inflicting on men, especially in the divorce courts, no para, decades-long manslavery, etc.? Question mark. There were moments when I considered asking her about this, ending with, quote, are you callous towards men or just stupid? Thanks to my now greater knowledge of women's psychology and women's evolutionary psychological history, I'm now very suspicious that the following is true. Quote, women have always been dependent, in brackets, parasitic, on men. Women could not hunt, could not plough, could not fight, so were always considered rather useless in the tribe, except for women's two traditional monopolies of vagina and womb. So men were forced to be nice to women or not get any sex from them. In the longer term, men needed women to grow and raise the next generation, so all tribes developed strategies to contain men's disregard of women, given women's total dependency on men to provide them scarce male hunted meat. Men and women were forced to get on, otherwise the tribe died out. I suspect that there are deep psychological differences between male and female brains that evolved over several million years, namely that women really feared losing the support of men, especially when she is so vulnerable when she is pregnant or when she is suckling a newborn and depends greatly on her man to give her and her baby sustenance and protection. When I observe women show a flash of fear across their eyes when I tell them I'm a masculist, I suspect that they are showing me their deep, unconscious, even Jungian, collective unconscious fear of women being abandoned by men, which in the ancient past meant death. If a woman made herself so hated in the group or tribe and was excluded from the group, cast out, that usually meant her death because she did not evolve to be competent at hunting. You can say that men evolved to understand and manipulate the world, and women evolved to manipulate men, bribing men with sex to extract men's resources, especially male hunted meat. The human female thus evolved to become the sexiest of mammals, evolving into a prostitutional role, trading access to her vagina for a man's meat. I suspect we will see women's collective fear of male abandonment manifest itself greatly over the next few years as masculists push for the men-fairing of the gender laws, the legislation of the para, and the severe punishment of fluffy manslavers by depriving them of a man. I suspect that my ex-girlfriend's reaction to my masculism is just the tip of the iceberg. I suspect that millions of women in the near future will undergo a similar reaction and pay a similar price, since at the end of the day, what has happened to my ex-girlfriend? She is now alone. She no longer has a relationship with her man, her masculist. She felt very uncomfortable about my masculism, and that was probably the major reason why we broke up. I resented her sexist hypocrisy, with her being a pro-feminist, yet an anti-masculist, like Susan Wojcicki, CEO of YouTube, who promotes feminist YouTube channels and deletes, in capital letters, Masculist and MGTOW channels, making her the most hated woman in the manosphere. As millions of women get rejected by masculists in the coming years due to their sexist hypocrisy, for example, the hypocritical attitude towards masculist ideas of my ex-girlfriend, then men's, that is masculists' contempt for women's sexist hypocrisy will only increase men's contempt for women and make men see women in an even more inferior light than men do of women already, with women's many genetic inferiorities. For example, their 10% smaller brains, their pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes, their 4 IQ point lower average IQ than men's, their greatly inferior achievement track record across the board. For example, everyone's heard of the term great man, but the term great woman sounds almost oxymoronic. I feel that I'm just one of the first masculists to go through this experience of witnessing the sexist hypocrisy of women who think that it's okay for women, for feminists, to lash out at how men oppress women, but that it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at how women oppress men. And in fact, that women oppress men far worse than vice versa due to their decades-lasting manslaving parasitism. This sexist hypocrisy of women will only increase male contempt for women's fluffy manslaving parasitism and fluffy feminist hypocrisy.